The Atlantic has now released the attack plans that Trump's top team shared in that secret signal group chat, and it sure as hell looks like Jeffrey Goldberg was telling the truth. Because as we talked about yesterday, Goldberg is the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, and earlier this month, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz accidentally added him to a signal group chat in which the vice president and top cabinet officials discussed plans to strike the Houthis in Yemen. Strikes which reportedly killed at least 53 people, including children. With then Goldberg revealing all of this a couple of days ago and claiming that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth shared in the chat precise information about weapons packages, targets, and timing. And so right away, you had legal experts noting that this whole dumpster fire could constitute violations of the Espionage Act and the Federal Records Act, not to mention just being a breach of national security. And this not only because Goldberg was added to the chat, but because the chat existed in the first place. Right? Classified materials are not supposed to be on private messaging platforms like Signal. But despite all that, Trump, members of his administration, and other Republican allies have downplayed the whole situation, and notably, in many cases, denying that classified information had been shared. Right on Monday, you had Hegseth calling Goldberg a deceitful and highly discredited so-called journalist who's made a profession of peddling hoaxes, and then saying,
"Nobody was texting war plans," and that's all I have to say about that.
Also, at a Senate hearing yesterday, the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, and the Director of the Central Intelligence Agency, John Ratcliffe, were both asked about the Signal chat, with Gabbard telling members of the Senate Intelligence Committee
there was no classified material that was shared.
And you had Ratcliffe saying much the same.
My communications, to be clear, in a Signal message group were entirely permissible and lawful and did not include classified information.
And finally, yesterday, you had Trump himself saying,
"It wasn't classified information, so this was not classified. Now, if it's classified information, it's probably a little bit different."
And so then, with that, you had Goldberg and his colleague Shane Harris writing today that these statements presented them with a dilemma, or with them noting that in the initial story about the Signal chat, they withheld specific information related to weapons and to the timing of attacks that we found in certain texts, with them explaining that, as a general rule, they don't publish information about military operations if that information could possibly jeopardize the lives of U.S. personnel. So saying that is why they chose to characterize the nature of the information being shared, not specific details about the attacks. But then, a very key thing is they went on to say that the statements by Hegseth, Gabbard, Ratcliffe, and Trump, combined with the assertions made by numerous administration officials that we are lying about the content of the Signal text, that's led us to believe that people should see the text in order to reach their own conclusion, and added, there is a clear public interest in disclosing the sort of information that Trump advisors included in non-secure communications channels, especially because senior administration figures are attempting to downplay the significance of the messages that were shared. Also, with all of that, notably, Goldberg and Harris still asked officials in the Trump administration if they objected to them publishing the full text, with reportedly White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt sending an email response riddled with typos saying, "As we have repeatedly stated, there was no classified information transmitted in the group chat. However, that does not mean we encourage the release of the conversation," saying this was intended to be an internal and private deliberation amongst high-level senior staff, and sensitive information was discussed. So for those reasons, yes, we object to the release. And then, in addition to that, you had a CIA spokesperson reportedly replying by asking them to withhold the name of Ratcliffe's chief of staff, which he had shared in the Signal chat because CIA intelligence officers are traditionally not publicly identified. Though here, notably, Ratcliffe also defended his sharing of the officer's identity in the hearing yesterday.
I communicated the name of a CIA officer not operating undercover, completely appropriate, who does openly and routinely coordinate with the White House as a member of my staff.
But still, even with Ratcliffe saying that, the Atlantic still opted to withhold the name of the officer. But, other than that, they say that the messages are unredacted, some of which we've seen or had an idea about before. You had J.D. Vance, for example, seemingly disagreeing with Trump, writing, "I am not sure the president is aware how inconsistent this is with his message on Europe right now." And then, with that, another takeaway being the contempt members of the administration seem to have for our allies, with Hegseth writing, "I fully share your loathing of European freeloading. It's pathetic." But of course, most notably, right, the key thing is that we now got to see exactly what Goldberg meant when he said that Hegseth shared precise information about weapons packages, targets, and timing. Because on March 15th, the day of the attack, the defense secretary sent a team update announcing, "Weather is favorable, just confirmed with CENTCOM, we are a go for mission launch." With them then revealing at 12:15 the first strike package, F-18 fighter jets would be launched. Then at 1:45 they would strike their target terrorist, and MQ-9 strike drones would also be launched. Right, and that was sent at 11:44 a.m., 31 minutes before the warplanes were launched, and about 2 hours before they were meant to reach their target. I just cannot really overstate how important that information is. Right, with Goldberg and Harris, for example, noting that experts have repeatedly told them that the use of Signal chat for such sensitive discussions poses a threat to national security. With them explaining, amongst other things, that if this information, especially the exact times American aircraft were taking off for Yemen, had fallen into the wrong hands, American pilots and other American personnel could have been exposed to even greater danger than they ordinarily would face. And then also, there's more, because you had Hegseth sending additional updates about timing and weapons packages. With then, at 1:48 p.m., after the initial strike, Waltz sending a message containing real-time intelligence about conditions at an attack attack site, writing, VP building collapse had multiple positive ID. With that, reportedly suggesting that US intelligence had ascertained the identities of the Houthi target or targets using either human or technical assets. With then, 6 minutes later, Vance, apparently confused by Waltz's message, responding with, "What?" To which Waltz then responded, typing too fast, "The first target, their top missile guy, we had positive ID of him walking into his girlfriend's building and it's now collapsed." And then finally, Hegseth later telling the group that the attacks would be continuing and basically saying he would keep sharing these highly sensitive operational details in a group chat with people in it that he didn't even know were there, writing, "Great job all, more strikes ongoing for hours tonight and we'll provide full initial report tomorrow, but on time, on target, and good readout so far." Also, I'll say beyond that, as everyone's now getting their hands on this, you have people pointing out some other interesting things, right? Like for example, you had The Atlantic also publishing screen grabs showing the list of people in the chat. And notably absent is Admiral Christopher Grady, the acting chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the senior military advisor to the president and the defense secretary. And so with that, you had the New York Times writing, "It is unheard of that the Pentagon's highest ranking officer would not be included in a senior meeting on a military operation." Also, that message from Waltz about IDing the guy walking into his girlfriend's building. With that, you had one former Pentagon correspondent for CNN noting that this offers insight into the military surveillance capabilities in this location, writing, "You only know that if you have overhead surveillance, comms intercepts, or an operative on the ground." But then, of course, in addition to that, there is the story on the flip side, because we are already seeing the pushback from the Trump administration, with the initial argument seemingly being based around the idea that the first Atlantic article said war plans, and this one today says attack plans. With seeing Leavitt, the White House press secretary, writing on X, "This entire story was another hoax written by a Trump hater who is well known for his sensationalist spin." And this is, you had Mike Waltz, who yesterday said he took full responsibility for Goldberg getting into the group, also saying, "No locations, no sources and methods, no war plans." But then also a Pentagon spokesperson at Hegseth himself hitting that same note, right? Calling the whole thing a hoax and really hitting on war plans versus attack plans, right? And so with that, we've seen a number of Trump supporters agreeing with that sentiment, but then others saying, no, you're just kind of arguing semantics, right? Arguing that even if they weren't full-on war plans, however you define that, they were still attack plans, and experts say that them being shared in this way could have put American lives in danger. With, for example, one former Pentagon official from the first Trump administration saying that the launch times posted in the chat would have been taken from a document outlining the real-time sequence of the operation, and adding, "It is highly classified and protected. Disclosure would compromise the operation and put lives at risk. Next to nuclear and covert operations, this information is the most protected." And so with that, there have been increasing calls for Hegseth to step down, including from Senator Tammy Duckworth, who you had writing on X, "Pete Hegseth is a fucking liar. This is so clearly classified info he recklessly leaked that could have gotten our pilots killed. He needs to resign in disgrace immediately." Though this also is, finally, you have people like Lindsey Graham kind of being somewhat in the middle, but still supporting Trump, or conceding that sensitive information had been shared, but still kowtowing to Trump, writing in a statement, "I think President Trump has handled this matter well." And then adding further, "I believe that all the participants in the chat were under the impression they were using an appropriate and secure form of communication. This will also fall into the category of lessons learned." Though again, all of this is playing out as takes like Graham's and those that have been far more defensive have been put in the category of downplaying a catastrophic fuck up, right? Numerous people with the appropriate background and experience saying there's almost no way that this was not classified information, handled in such a loosey-goosey way they literally had the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic in the chat, and doing so on a less secure platform like Signal instead of secure government channels to possibly subvert Freedom of Information Act requests and conceal damning information from the public. I mean, it's part of the reason you've seen people who have traditionally been in Donald Trump and his team's corner, like Dave Portnoy, saying, "Heads got to roll over this." They're saying, "Mike Waltz, you have to lose your job."
I don't like calling for people's heads. Michael Waltz, it seems like you're the guy who added him to the group chat. You have to lose your job. You should step down. You cannot be adding random people to a group chat with this sensitive, classified information. Just be like, "Oh no, poo-poo, it's on him. He should have left the group chat instantly. This guy shouldn't have stayed in. It's on Jeffrey Goldberg for not immediately being like, hey, I should be here." No. It's on you for adding them.
Though, of course, with that, you had people noting just Goldberg being added to the chat was just one of the several issues about what was happening. Yes, it seemingly hits on incompetence, but also it just kind of hits on the part of that's why they got caught. But then also, in addition to that, notably, this was all happening as U.S. intelligence chiefs were again getting ready to testify before the House Intelligence Committee, where we saw Democrats with giant printouts of the messages released this morning, and then otherwise just hammering down how much of a massive fuck up this seemed to be and pushing for the administration to acknowledge that and accept responsibility, including there being calls for Hegseth to resign. Right, at one point, for example, it was pointed out that the messages released today appear to directly contradict Gabbard's claim yesterday that precise operational issues were not part of this conversation, with Gabbard saying that our answer was based on our, quote, recollection or lack thereof on the details that were posted in the chat. But with that, she was still claiming that this information was not classified, even if it was extremely sensitive.
It was a mistake that a reporter was inadvertently added to a Signal chat with high-level national security principals, having a policy discussion about imminent strikes against the Houthis. The conversation was candid and sensitive. But as the President National Security Advisor stated, no classified information was shared. There were no sources, methods, locations, or war plans that were shared.
But then, at the same time, we saw that she didn't disagree that information about the timing of the attacks was classified as top secret under intelligence community rules. But she then also defended it by saying that the material was posted to the chat by Hegseth, and as Secretary of Defense, he is in charge of declassifying material from the Pentagon. And this is Ratcliffe, on the other hand, accused Goldberg of being deliberately false and misleading in his reporting, insisting that he didn't share any classified information, but then also seemingly ducking the question of if classified information had been shared in general.
My answers haven't changed. I used an appropriate channel to communicate sensitive information. It was permissible to do so. I didn't transfer any classified information.
You know, with all of this, we're gonna have to wait to see how things play out, right? Do we get more information? Is there any real fallout or accountability? All of this, of course, developing in real time. So in the meantime, I gotta pass the question off to you. What are your thoughts, opinions, and reactions here? Hey, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this clip from the full Philip DeFranco show. And also, a big thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring our Clips channel. Turn your passion into profit over at squarespace.com/Phil, or use the QR code. Because whether you're launching a business or a lucrative side hustle, your website is your digital business card. It's the only space where you control the story, no algorithms or distractions. And with Squarespace, it's so easy because they got a ton of stunning professional templates with drag and drop editing that makes site design incredibly simple, no coding required. So get started for free at squarespace.com/Phil, or scan the QR code on screen and use code Phil for 10% off when ready to launch. Squarespace.com/Phil.